one day after running, like I started to have knee pain. And I do think looking back that there was like a slight injury, like there was some swelling, like I think
Right.
I probably just ran, overused it kind of thing. But it just didn't get better. So I iced it, I
Yeah.
rested it, started doing physio. A few months later, all of a sudden what shoulder was it? My left shoulder started to hurt.
Yep.
And pretty
Yep.
severely, like enough that like it was hard pushing doors open. Like
Mm.
I couldn't really lift weights anymore. And then all of a sudden went to my right shoulder.
Yeah.
And so basically over about 3.5 years, my pain became more and more debilitating and it spread like wildfire throughout my entire body.
Welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce Tanner to the show. Thanks for being on the show. Excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great.
Awesome. So let's get right to it. Tell us a little bit about your perfect storm and kind of, what symptoms were you dealing with?
hmm You know, in terms of, my journey with mainly chronic pain, pretty widespread, and I'll kind of dive into that.
Yep.
Definitely some chronic fatigue in the mix as well. Maybe not as severe, but it was there too. And a spectrum of symptoms. When I talk about it with people, it's important to know, chronic pain, chronic symptoms, and mine was neuroplastic or mind body or whatever term you go off of.
Yep.
Um, Meaning my body wasn't damaged, but I didn't realize that at first. There was
Yeah.
no disease process taking place. And, when symptoms came on, it kind of develops over a lifetime, right? It's how I kind of talk about it with people is, even for myself at a young age, I was a very sensitive kid. There's no question about that.
Yep.
Looking back, like fairly heightened anxiety for a long period of time. Um, Definitely some trauma in the mix, but just, bullying I faced in grade school, different things of that nature. So there was all this stuff taking place at the time. And even in my adolescent years, like I became addicted to like drugs and alcohol. So there was definitely
Hmm.
some component there. I was fortunate I have very loving parents and they put me in like a long-term treatment center when I was like 17. So there was a lot of like mental health addictions issues going on long before the pain ever came on. Fortunately, I got sober when I was like 18, so and have been ever since. So like I had that under wraps, which was definitely beneficial. But shortly getting out of drug treatment center, and I graduated high school fortunately, and went on to university. There was a lot of these patterns that were just not useful. There was high anxiety, there's perfectionism, there was people pleasing. Like I can be pretty high achieving. So when I went to university, it was like a spark. Like it just
Yeah.
like took off. And when I was about 23, there was some pain before, but it never became chronic. When I was about 23, I started to develop chronic pain.
Yep.
And so how this developed at the time was, I was training for my first triathlon at the time. And so I was running a lot. Like I was running, 50, 60 kilometers a week. Again, very
Oh,
type A, yeah, very intense, doing school intensely. At the time, I was getting more serious with my partner, who I'm married to now.
yep.
So there was a lot of life changes. I changed my major in school. And one day after running, like I started to have knee pain. And I do think looking back that there was like a slight injury, like there was some swelling, like I think
Right.
I probably just ran, overused it kind of thing. But it just didn't get better. So I iced it, I
Yeah.
rested it, started doing physio. A few months later, all of a sudden what shoulder was it? My left shoulder started to hurt.
Yep.
And pretty severely, like enough that like it was hard pushing doors open. Like
Mm.
I couldn't really lift weights anymore. And then all of a sudden went to my right shoulder. And
Yep.
so basically over about 3.5 years, my pain became more and more debilitating and it spread like wildfire throughout my entire body.
Right.
Um, about a year and a half in, I think like my worst pain started, which was my back. I found that was the most debilitating of all of the pain because at that point I was terrified to move. My mental health got worse by the day. So like highly anxious, panic attacks, um, and eventually, and I talk about with people the chronic symptom, it almost becomes a trauma in and of itself. A
Yeah.
lot of times I talk about it as almost like sensitization trauma is the term we use at
Yeah.
my clinic. And this is what it is. It's the trauma from the onset of progression of your chronic symptoms because I was going to doctors, I was doing every treatment imaginable, invasive procedures, and nothing was helping. And I became more and more having this kind of trauma response to the
Yeah.
symptoms the longer they went on. And so by the end, like I was just shut down. Like I just clicked off. Like I was numb, wasn't moving. I managed to graduate my undergrad somehow
Hmm.
during this whole process. But then I had to go off work. Like I just couldn't manage moving my body. Like it was so incredibly painful. So this is kind of like the process that happened to me over about 3.5 years. And I think it's pretty common for a lot of people that have
Yeah.
faced chronic symptoms to be feeling these things, to be more and more dysregulated by the sensations.
Were
And
you
so this,
obsessed at all with your symptoms, body checking, OCD
oh
looping
yeah.
thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of obsession. I've been obsessive since I was a kid, like without a
Hmm.
doubt, about different things, about school, about hobbies, about when I was in university, I was obsessed, and then that obsessive pattern just got applied to the pain or symptoms. Like I tell people, I was probably thinking about my pain, I don't know, 80, 90% of the day. Like it's all I talked about, it's all I focused on. It was my entire world. And the more obsessed we get, as we know with mind body issues, the worse it becomes,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so like there was just this constant checking and avoidance that was taking place that, the pain and fatigue was bad enough, but on top of it, your world just shrinks, right? Like it gets
Yeah.
smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's what it is. It's like by the end, it was kind of a shell of a life that I was living. Like I
Did you have
wasn't going,
like a safe room where you just stayed in there and you kind of didn't leave the
yeah.
house type of thing?
So I basically two positions that were less painful. Sometimes I could lie for long periods. So I was at the time we were living in like me and my partner, we were living kind of like a basement suite. Like it was just like pretty small area. So I spent a lot of time in my room. Like I just lied there in the dark,
Yeah.
spiraling. The other position is I don't even know if you would say watch TV. I was basically dissociative. Like I was there, but I don't even know what I was watching. And by the end, that's all I did. It was either I was lying in bed or I had this like straight back chair and I would roll this towel up under
Hmm.
my lower back. And so like I would sit in that position for just hours upon hours, kind of spacing out watching TV. So these were like my two places that I basically was spending all my time. So like yeah, very limited movement by the end. Like I wouldn't be going on walks or like maybe to the grocery store once in a while, but it was a pretty small world that I was living.
Did you do any of the constant 8 hours a day research, Facebook groups, investigating type of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so there was which led me fortunately to this kind of mind body space, but there was a
Yeah.
lot of researching. Like I was, and I was training to be a therapist, right? Like I
Right.
hadn't done my undergrad or my graduate degree yet, but so I knew a lot of this stuff. Like it was interesting because like I thought like I remember a friend told me once he lived upstairs from where we were living. Good friend of mine, also a therapist, he was like, and he didn't have the term like neuroplastic, but he was like, just so you know, this is psychosomatic.
Hmm.
That was like my first inkling. And I think my partner thought that long ago, but she didn't dare kind of tell me at that
Hmm.
point. But
Yeah.
he told me, he was like, just so you know, like that's what's going on. Like was very blunt about it. And I was like kind of pretty angry about that response. I was like,
Yeah.
this is outrageous. But it was just interesting because I knew about these ideas to some degree, maybe not in great detail, but I was so opposed to them. I was like, this is not what's happening. Like, I need to,
Did you find yourself trying to build a case and try to get justice so people, believed you what you were going through, that this is real. I'm really feeling sick. I feel like, did you almost milk it extra just so people could believe you? Like you had like a courtroom situation where you have exhibit A, exhibit B, and I
Yeah,
feel
I know
like
what you
this.
mean. Yeah. Yeah, and this is the hard part is we talk about mind body concerns. People so much buy into like, oh, that means it's not real. Or
Right.
like that
Right.
was I think my line of thinking, where it's as we know from brain scans, it's just as real, it's just as painful, like whatever symptom you have, it's very real, it's just not being triggered in the body. But I think I fell into that a bit where I felt, and I had pretty supportive friends
Hmm.
and loved ones, but I did feel like with medical professionals, like I really had to like convince them, right? Like I really was trying to
Yep.
like convince them, like, no, like this is like incredibly debilitating. Like I need some type of treatment, like whatever it might be. Like I need something. Like this is not getting better. And I think that happened in kind of the middle part of my journey, and then there
Yep.
was a giving up. Like when I shut down. I was no longer trying to convince people. It was just like, this is what it is. This is what it's always going to be. I'm not, and not in the, because I think not fighting our symptoms can be healing, but it wasn't that.
Sure.
It was like a despairing, hopeless, helpless kind of feel
Yeah,
that,
like what's the point? I'm gonna either suffer for the rest of my life and be on disability, living in a basement apartment with a cat, or I'll be dead on Tuesday. That's pretty much what the thoughts that came into my head
yeah,
constantly.
yeah, like that's really what it was. And I think for a lot of people, and I put a disclaimer. I'm going to talk about thoughts of suicide a bit here because I know it can be triggering for some people, but that was a part of my journey. Like it was just
Yeah.
like, what's the point? Like,
Yeah.
and I get why people get there because you're living this very shallow life, and I think that's incredibly difficult and hard for people, and was incredibly hard for me because we start to lose hope because the medical system it's no longer helpful. Like we kind of run out of options to some degree. And fortunately for myself, like I never went down the line of like surgery or experimental treatments like that. I get why people get there, but I was very fortunate that I didn't kind of chase that down too far.
How long were you in limbo with the research and that stage? How long was that? How many years do you think that was, or months
Yeah.
or
So
whatever?
it was interesting because when it first started, like there's something wrong with your body. That's what it feels like, but it wasn't all consuming at first.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until it became more and more widespread, like I probably would say like a year and a half in, is where it really took off, where I was in like fight or flight, frantically looking for a solution, trying to figure something out. And definitely like the last 8, 9 months, I was in pain, like it was just shut down. So like I was still there were still bursts of research where I'd be like, I got to figure this out. And that's how I got led to this mind body space. Is I was up at 2 o'clock in the morning, not being able to sleep because my back hurt so much, and that's where I first learned about Dr. Sarno and some of his approach. And again, I was pretty opposed at first. Like I found that out at 2 in the morning, closer to the end of my journey, and
Yeah.
like I didn't do anything about it for a month or two. Like I think I bought like one of the audiobooks. Like I started and then I would stop. Like I just wasn't
It becomes a
convinced.
part of the noise. Like we've surrounded ourselves with so much research noise that it kind of melts in there. It's like, yeah, I don't know. It seems wishy-washy, woo, maybe, right? And then, did you at all go through the Facebook group, toxic Facebook groups at all? Did you get sucked into those?
No, I never got into Facebook groups. I was very fortunate
Lucky.
in some of that. Like I wasn't into yeah, because I know there's a lot of
Oh, it's
different groups and yeah, and I
mhm.
think they can have that feel to them that
Yeah.
it isn't helpful. And I was fortunate to not go down that line. Yeah, and yeah, I think I wasn't convinced at first, and then I just made a choice at some point. Like I remember there was like I was actually on my bachelor party. I was on my bachelor party because I was going to get married in the
Yep.
midst of all this pain, which I wouldn't recommend.
Oh,
It was it was a bit much, but I was on my bachelor party, and I just with my friends who were supportive, and
yep.
I just like made the choice. Like I was like, when I get back, like I'm doing this. Like I'm gonna dive in. I'm gonna read all the books. I'm going to, and yeah, like it really clicked. Like when I got back home, I wasn't maybe fully convinced that this is what was taking place, but I was convinced this was my only option that I had left.
Right.
And so that was kind of like what clicked of like, I'm going to do this. So I started doing that. I started to look for evidence that maybe my pain actually was neuroplastic or mind body, which was really helpful. So like at the beginning, it was more of this like education, challenging kind of my thoughts and beliefs about what
Yeah.
was taking place, right? And starting to move in that line of thinking.
What
Um,
year was this around?
this
And
was
how
like
long?
right at the tail end. So, I say it was about 3.5 years before I came to this.
Yeah.
And then it took me, I'm careful with giving a timeline because I think some people get so they get so caught up in like, oh, like they healed in this amount of time. So I just
Yeah.
preface like everyone's different. Like I've seen people
Yeah.
heal in weeks, I've seen people heal over the course of 2 years, right? Everyone's different. For myself, like it wasn't super quick, but probably 4 months into like making that decision, I would
Mhm.
say my pain was no longer chronic.
Right.
Um, like it wasn't like it was there and I would get flares, but it wasn't chronic. And then it took me another 4 months or so to like start to fully use my body. Right.
Right.
So like I did a lot of the brain retraining and I did a lot of exposure because I wasn't moving. So I had
Right.
to like at first I was doing these like somatic practices, practicing walking back and forth for 2 or 3 minutes.
Hmm.
And over months, like all of a sudden I could walk half an hour, right? Like I started to go back to the gym. Like I needed to basically retrain my brain that, hey, you're safe to move. You're okay to do this. So I think,
While you're doing this, did you feel worse at times? And did you have setbacks? Or was
oh
it
yeah,
like, okay, good. Talk about that.
yeah, yeah. So there was definitely, it wasn't smooth. And I think that's where people get caught up is like they'll have a flare and then they'll take 20 steps back. And it's okay to take some steps back when you have a flare. Like it's intense, but like it wasn't perfect. Like there was points where flares would happen and I'd be down and out for a week, and then I get
Yeah.
back on track. There was definitely like a bumpiness. I always
Right.
explain with people. I know some people might be listening, so it's kind of like people think like, oh, I find out about my body and it'll just be this smooth, like woo, like everything will just go down. But it's not that. It's this. Like
It's
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 we're,
it's a
we're
fucking nightmare. It's a
yeah,
fucking nightmare.
we're moving in the right direction, but it's
Yeah.
bumpy, right? And
Yeah.
so I think it's understanding that's normal, and that's what I
Yeah.
went through. Is like sometimes I'd have these huge leaps. Like I remember the first time there was like this park by my house.
Yeah.
It was maybe like I don't know, 20-minute walk. I remember the first time I could do that. It was like amazing. I was like blown away of like I made it this whole loop without having to turn back. Was good
Yeah.
to go. Didn't have to take breaks. So there's these highs, but there was also moments where I do the walk and all of a sudden my knees and legs would be just and back would just be killing me, right? So we
Yeah.
don't want to be intense about the healing, but we got to be consistent and
Yeah.
wade through the bumpiness essentially.
So when you had the setbacks and the flares, were you were you dealing with a lot of the doubts, saying thinking that did you maybe miss something? Maybe this, you're a special case. Did you deal with any of
Yeah.
those thoughts?
There was definitely some doubts, and I was pretty cautious with them as they were happening
Hmm.
because I don't think I was fully convinced my pain was neuroplastic
Yeah.
until it was like 80% gone. At that point, like you probably couldn't convince me otherwise. Like it was like, okay, this is
Yeah.
clearly working.
And for
So,
those of the people out there that may not understand what you mean, when you say
sorry. Yeah.
neuroplastic pain, can you kind of describe what you mean?
Yeah, so neuroplastic is just like a new term for mind body. What we mean by this is like the body isn't damaged or diseased. What's happening is like miscommunication starts to take place between body and brain. Like all pain, all physical symptoms, they occur in the brain. Whether the body's involved or not is really up for debate, right? But like sometimes if you sprained your ankle, signals are going from that ankle to your brain, letting your brain know like, hey, there's damage being done. Brain perceives it accurately, it produces pain. This is how like we think about like acute injury. The problem with chronic pain or symptoms is often there's miscommunication. So, for example, like my back was in agony, but there were safe signals going up. they were letting my brain know like, hey, we're okay. But
Mhm.
my brain, due to be stuck in like this state of danger or survival, was misinterpreting it. And so when we think about like neuroplastic pain, you have to understand that when signals come up from your body, like it's getting combined with a bunch of other information. It's getting combined with your emotional state, your nervous system state. It's getting combined with the beliefs about your body and whether it's safe or
Mhm.
dangerous. It's getting combined with obsessive thinking and how that maybe is creating more danger. So it's getting combined with all this information. So they're like with neuroplastic symptoms, the body's actually okay. It's just the brain has been wired for danger. And so like that belief, I was pretty bought in at points, but there was doubts for sure along the way where I was like,
Yeah.
maybe there really is something wrong. Like I remember when I was first starting to walk, I my back was doing fairly well actually, but like my knees would like get so painful. And there was moments where I was like, maybe there's something actually wrong with my knee.
Well,
Um,
yeah. Well, it's hard for me. It was hard to the in the beginning. I did DNRS, right? So I didn't understand
yeah,
how a neural pathway would get rid of Lyme or get rid of a pain. I'm like, what is it? Just bypass that area of the brain and it just goes away. That disease just goes away. That Lyme, that the EMF, the you fill in the blank just goes poof. I'm like, I don't understand how that works. Right. So it's trying to, when you have a certain belief, it's like, you know what? You don't really have to believe it yet. Just do the work anyway. Eventually it'll kind of like when you look back, it kind of makes sense later. Because in the beginning, I was lost, totally lost.
exactly. I relate to you there, and I think that that's sometimes what gets people stuck. And I was very fortunate that I didn't follow. Like I never thought I need to believe this fully or I'm not going to heal. Like I
Right.
never fell into, but I think people fall into that, and then what happens is they get caught in the like gathering evidence that it's neuroplastic. They get caught in like trying to
Yeah.
convince themselves, and then they delay all the other work. Like they delay the brain retraining, the exposure, they delay the emotional processing, they delay the trauma work or creating safety in their life or living differently. All that gets delayed because they almost get caught over here.
Yeah.
And that's what I tell people when I'm working with them. You don't have to believe this fully. If you're
Exactly.
open, great. That's all we need. We need an openness, enough openness that you're willing to do some of the work.
Right.
After that, I don't care how much someone believes at first. Like that will build over time naturally as we do this. So I think like that's like a useful way to think about it. And I was fortunate at the time, like I even when I had doubts, I really prevented myself from going down the Google rabbit
Oh,
hole or
yeah.
like it, and that's hard. Like I think we get caught into that, but we just want to limit that as much as possible and just commit to trying it and see where we kind of get.
Right. What was your day to day like? What did you have a routine? Give us like an example of like a Tuesday of like the middle of your journey.
Kind of when I was like healing kind of thing.
Yeah. What was your
Yeah.
day like for like a
Um,
Tuesday?
yeah, so I was very consistent with the work, but I want to be clear, like it was flexible. Like
Mhm.
I luckily didn't get obsessed about the healing work. I don't know how I pulled that off, but I never got like locked into that because I see that happen where people are doing
Yeah.
way too much, right? Like they're trying to force things to change.
Hmm.
So there was this attitude of like I'm gonna like do the work and we'll see what the result is. Like I wasn't trying to force anything as I was going, which
Yeah.
was very helpful for me. So day to day, it really depended. Like I would do some more like nervous system regulation stuff.
Yeah.
I started working pretty quick. So like even on my lunch break, I might go drive out to like more of a nature area. I do some breath
Mhm.
work for 15 minutes,
Yeah.
maybe read part of the mind body book. Um, so like some of that was in the mix.
Yeah.
Consistently, I did the exposure work. So like with walking or running or lifting weights, like I was doing some of that in the morning before I went to work for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I would do it after work as well. So I was
Nice.
very, especially with that stuff, because I knew I had like an uphill battle to moving again. So I was
Right.
very consistent of doing that once or twice a day if there was no flare. And then there was regulation stuff in the mix, right? Like some of the breath work on lunch. I might do some qigong in the morning to kind of regulate.
Did you do any sort of like meditation or visuals at all?
Yeah, so I did a lot of visualizing at first.
Mhm.
So when I was first healing, before I even started moving my body, I would be visualizing myself doing activity again. Like I would visualize myself living life again, working again, and deal with the dysregulation I felt. Because like those visualizations can be very overwhelming to someone. So I was doing the visualization, but then I was also like processing emotions and dysregulation. Like it was kind of like a starting place that I did.
Yeah.
And then like after I did the visualization, I got the courage up to like start walking, right? Or start
Mhm.
like so there was some visualization. Like even my wedding, like the day of my wedding, I was only a month into healing. So I mean, in terms of like a wedding, like there's a lot of standing, and I modified it, right? Like we only did pictures for half an hour, like things like that.
Yeah.
But it was pretty good. Like there was pain, don't get me wrong, but it was so much better. And I did a lot of visualizing of the day and like processing my stress and dysregulation prior to that.
It's like a
Um,
mental exposure. You did it. You process it
exactly.
mentally, and then when day came up, it was you kind of were prepared in a way.
Exactly. And it helped me modify because I just wasn't there. Like if I had been 4 months into my healing, my wedding would have been much more painless.
Mhm.
But there was pain. But I was able to dance. Like I thought that was a huge win.
Nice.
Like I was able to dance for 20 or 30 minutes. Like that was a big win. And there was stiffness and pain definitely in my back and hip legs. But but that was a big moment where I was like, this is possible. Like I've only been doing this a month. Like I can get there if I keep chipping away. So like the belief grew the more I
Yeah.
started to have these wins along the
Did
way.
you have any resistance in the beginning of doing your visuals when you first started? Like the first couple of months, maybe?
Yeah,
Where you get,
like I think
or was
there
it
I
you were just a natural, just able to flow with your visuals?
not necessarily. Like I think sometimes when I first visualized, when I think back, like there was a lot of anxiety. Like
Yeah.
even just like putting myself there. So I think
Yeah.
there was a lot of signals of like, don't do this. Like this is too much. So I did have to like I always tell people with visualization, you gotta like titrate it. Like don't go visualize all these things that you haven't been able to do for 40 minutes. Like that's probably too much at first. So at first it was just like these small moments.
Mhm.
Um, but eventually I could get to a place where I could visualize myself and like have more belief of like, oh, I can do this. Like this is going to be possible for me.
Yeah.
And like almost savor like what it would feel like to lift weights again, right? Like some of that
Right.
stuff became
In a
more
way, the visuals are like also a form of exposure because when you do a past memory visual, you're reminded of what you used to be able to do that you can't do now. So you might get those horrible feelings, and then you get reminders of you'll never do that in the future. No, you're going to be on disability, so don't even try to imagine yourself by a beach running. So that in a way it'll send you the horrible thoughts and the doubts, but it's a great opportunity for exposure. So in a way, the visuals is another form of exposure. That kind
it
of
is.
it's
It
great.
is. And you're trying to get to a place eventually where you can like maybe feel some pleasant sensations as you do it. Like that's how you rewire your brain is you work through all of the emotions and dysregulation it brings up. And
Yeah,
then it's like I could start to enjoy it. And you do the exact same thing as you're doing exposure to movement, right? Like you're doing it slowly at first. And like I remember when I was first doing exposure, like walking or sitting on couches was the first thing I did. Oh, it was awful. Like it was
yeah,
not an enjoyable time. But like I over a while I got used to it. I could notice like, after I went for a 10-minute walk, I feel all these endorphins. It feels great. Like there was things that
yeah.
like I would so you're dealing with the unpleasantness, but you're also savoring the pleasant as you're kind of going, right?
Right. That's amazing. And it becomes more eventually, for me, it became a lifestyle, not so much work that I had to do, but eventually I really started to enjoy it. And I
Yeah.
became a different person. Like I never did this stuff years ago. I was a guy that rotted in front of the TV, go for a smoke, eat crappy food, go to work, be miserable, and do that every day. Right. So
Yeah.
this journey, this is where we can kind of get into the spiritual thing, where it almost becomes a gift because it's like a big shakeup to change your life. It's not even about the symptoms anymore. It's about, the symptoms are like an alarm going, hey, you got to change some things in your life, right? It goes, it goes deeper than just the symptoms, it seems.
Yeah. I think you're right there. I think, I talk about with people in terms of this concept of like social safety. right?
Hmm.
Um, because we can't just go back to living the way for a lot of us, some of us
Yeah.
can, but for a lot of us, we can't go back to living the way we were
Right.
before we became ill. Like there was there, and no one's to blame for it. Like there's a reason we
Yeah.
developed this way, and like I'm careful saying it because like people feel like judgment towards themselves, but it's like, everything you went through created the way you were living. Like
Yeah.
it's not a blameworthy thing,
Yeah.
but we have the responsibility of knowing like we need to live differently.
Yeah.
Like
Life
there's
throws us curveballs, shit happens, and you know what? Life will keep throwing us curveballs, and now we have the tools to move through with it.
Yeah. And that's what I mean is, for myself, like perfectionism, that was a major reason my pain developed without a doubt. And I want to be clear, like it's something I can snap into, but I'm so quick now to catch it and
Yeah.
to not, because I can't live with that amount of pressure on myself. Like it's just
Oh,
not reasonable. When I've followed that path again, my symptoms will come back. So I know like eight out of 10 times, like it's usually pressure and intensity that's driving this thing. And so, I really had to change the way I was living life, to actually heal. I needed to live life differently. I needed to change
mhm.
factors in my life. Like, for example, there was friends I cut out of my life. I don't regret
Yes.
those choices. Like
Yeah.
there was
Feels good.
things yeah, like there was things I had to change. So there's like all the micro work that you're doing internally, but it's also like how do you use all that, your understanding of your nervous system, your body, your emotions to start to live differently in the future.
Mhm. Yeah. That's a big one. Being aware of, and then because before we weren't even aware, we were almost desensitized. But then this journey happens, and you're like a radar that's able to see everything that you don't like, so you make the changes, right? You become like a new person. And like for me, I started liking different music. My music
Yeah.
taste changed. I,
Yeah.
I was out in nature and I started cutting people out, and it felt so really good. Like I'm like, I'm never going back to that. I'm never smoking a cigarette ever again. Oh, how did I almost got anxiety just thinking about the person I used to be. I'm like, how did I not snap out of it? That's crazy.
Yeah. And this is the thing. This is a hard sell when I say this. So I don't say this to people at first when I'm meeting with them. But the pain and symptoms, it really can be a gift. I think it's hard
Yeah.
to see it that way at first. So I'm not invalidating that it's incredibly difficult because it is. But but I can tell you definitively, I would have never changed my perfectionism if I didn't have pain.
Right.
Because I had anxiety and that was not a loud enough danger signal for me to actually change. I would have gone on miserable,
Yeah.
like trying to be high achieving all the time, constantly being anxious. Like that, I maybe something different would have snapped me out of it, but at the path I was on, it wasn't enough. The pain was enough. It was like I can't go back to doing that, right?
Yeah.
Um, so there was a big lifestyle shift. And this is like the maintenance of the work I always tell people. Like,
Yep.
I still do lots of regulation work and all sorts of things. I don't do the exposure to movement anymore because I can move. But
Yeah.
there is like I need to be very aware of like my patterns. Like, am I going through my week in this hypervigilant state? Like that's not going to be useful. So I need to the quick and you get better at it over time. Like I've just gotten better at catching these things as I go.
Yeah, I think this is like a lifelong thing where you're like a cork in water. You're gonna move through the curveballs that are sent to you. So your nervous system is like the survival baseline might go up a bit because your dog died, right? My parents are still alive.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be going through some of this, and you're gonna get symptoms. It's an alarm system that's there to get your attention. Go, yeah, I know we're dealing with some stuff. Be aware of it. That thing over there, and you've been watching a lot of politics stuff, a little bit too much news, symptoms. You're like, oh, thanks for letting me know. I got the tools now. You know what? I'm gonna move through it. Compared to like I was saying before,
Yeah.
where we didn't move through it and we were stuck and we were chronically ill. Now we're like cork and water. We're able to adapt, and for the rest of our lives, it's like a lifestyle almost.
Exactly. It is. And that's where the maintenance is like we need to shift the way we're living and I've seen people do amazing work, change careers, change relationships. Like these are
Yes.
hard things. I
Yeah.
don't say it lightly because it's terrifying to start to change how you function in the world or change factors in your life that have been there a long time, right? But I think, yeah, like it can be really rewarding starting to shift some of that.
Making some of those hard decisions, and some people don't want to. They don't want to open that can of worms when it comes to staying in a toxic relationship, staying at that job because it pays the bills, and then taking that leap of faith. It's like some people, it's like it's going to be very difficult for you to move forward in changing your life if you're going to stay in that relationship that you've been in, where it's like literally, it's like having 10 tigers in the room, right? And some people, there's it's up to them. You got to make those hard decisions, and it's like it's up to you, right? It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's tough. And I think, I feel for people because it's a hard situation to shift some of this. And I think
Oh yeah.
I always tell people just start small. Start with something small at first, right? Like if you're in university, it's like study a little bit less for that test and see how it goes, right? Like these little changes where you're doing things a little bit differently, and that can lead to the bigger changes
Mhm.
that are possible. And I just think, yeah, I think this is the scarier part of the work. Well, I think a lot of the work can be scary, but this is a
Oh
scary
yeah.
part of the work for sure of starting to change how
Did you
we
become
function.
spiritual at all during this time? Did you get more in tune with your higher
Yeah,
self, yourself?
yeah, it's an interesting, idea. Like I think when I was first developing pain, this wasn't the full reason my pain developed, but I was going through a bit of a spiritual crisis of like,
Mhm.
had belief in more of kind of the typical God that a lot of us
Right.
believe in. Like I believed in that when I was a kid.
Hmm.
My family wasn't super religious or anything, but there was that belief.
Right.
And that shifted. Like there was a belief of like becoming more of an atheist at the time.
Hmm.
Um, or like diving into some of that, and I think some of that became a bit toxic. Like it was just like it was not helpful. It gave me a really dark view of the world.
Oh yeah.
I think at the time, and so like that's been up and down over the years for me of like becoming more spiritual or less spiritual. But I think since healing, there was more of an openness of like exploring that space.
Yeah.
And I think, everyone's different. Like it's not like you have to believe certain things spiritually to heal, but like I think there is a more openness of viewing that and exploring that in some capacity.
I think it's sometimes what we need to cross, like I say this a lot, to cross that invisible bridge because everything around us is completely, the 3D reality that we're around is it's like it's lying to you. Because if you were to Google one of the whatever amount of symptoms that you have, they usually say you can't recover, you need to manage, recover, right? And your symptoms, right? They're lying to you. So you're dealing with all this, this reality, and then in order to cross that invisible bridge, you gotta, you know, dig deep inside yourself from within and get the answers to get that courage to cross it because everything else is telling you don't cross it, you're not going to make it, you're going to fall down the cliff. So this is where it's like the fear is driving you to tune in and kind of like tap into your higher self or whatever you believe in.
Totally. I think that spirituality can be a great resource for a lot of people
Yeah.
to deal with the uncertainty and to maybe challenge some of the beliefs that we believed about our body or about ourselves. So yeah, no, I agree with you there that it can be an amazing resource that can support people for sure.
If you were to give somebody a piece of advice, let's somebody that's just got into, just like you saw a video, you gotten all this pains, symptoms, and something that'll kind of something that you wish you knew when you first started. What piece of advice would you give?
hmm So I think it really goes back to what we talked about earlier in the sense of understanding that healing first off is possible. I think that's the first belief that we really need to develop. Well, we need to believe that maybe this is my body,
Yeah.
and increase that belief over time. But we also need to believe of like, healing is possible. It's happened for, you know, thousands of people, maybe even more, right? Like it's happened for a lot of people. People have made these amazing changes. So it's also having that belief and that increase of like this is possible. The other thing I tell people is just that knowing that it's going to be bumpy as we start to change things. And you're not going to force your symptom to go away. The goal, when I talk about it with people, is like, let's explore trying these things. Like, you've tried the other medical procedures, they haven't worked for you. That's why you're here. It's like, let's just explore. Because I think that's a useful way that I kind of viewed it of like, I'm just going to try these things out. Like, I'm not going to deal with all this pressure of like trying to force something to change. I'm going to try a bunch of things out. And there's things I tried that didn't work, and some things worked better for me. And that's great. Like, with each person I work with, I don't know what's going to work for you. I'm not 100% sure. I got some ideas, and let's try them and let's explore. But I think that's it, is like, increase the belief over time. It's not going to latch on. Believe that there is a possibility of healing for you, right? And just exploring, trying some of these things consistently.
Yeah.
That combination, I think, is a great starting place for people. It puts us in a good place to make healing potentially possible. Yeah.
Awesome. And tell us kind of what you do now with your work. What is it that exactly that you do, and how can people
Yeah,
get
so
find you?
I run a therapy clinic that specifically deals with neuroplastic pain or symptoms, um, and mental health concerns as well. And we have like a small team, but a team of 7 or 8 therapists that we're doing this work. For viewers' sake, though, like it's not a coaching service though, so like we're only able to work with clients in certain provinces in Canada, so we are a bit limited there just with regulations.
Mm.
But yeah, we offer individual therapy through that. I also have my other agency where we provide like a digital course, super in depth. This is kind of learn on your own, hours upon hours of educational videos. I think there's like 50 or 60 somatic practices, meditations. Like it's a whole platter of things that you can try, and we give some structure there. So like we also have that as well for people outside of Canada if they want to do more of kind of like a self-learn thing.
Mm.
Um, and then yeah, like I made it a point of my agency. We also offer a lot of free resources. So like I have my YouTube channel
Mhm.
where I put a lot of meditations out there for free. Somatic practices. There's some qigong on there too if people are interested in that. Like there's a lot there that people can kind of go through and get a sense of, if it's a fit for them. I also do a podcast with my partner. We usually do that every week, so there's lots of education in there as well for free. So those are some of my free resources that I
Yeah,
know you
we'll
have
put
the.
everything in the description. People can link up for sure.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well,
wonderful.
thanks for joining. I had a good time. This was great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's great.